Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Geeky Leaks podcast. Unfortunately, Josh couldn't be joining us this week, so I'm going to be flying solo, but the news never rests, so I still have topics to talk about, and rest assured, we will talk about them. So this week, we had a couple of weird things that I didn't understand why they happened, but hey, whatever, that's just part of how things go, I guess. The first kind of anomaly this week, Nvidia enabled DirectX 12 support on Fermi GPUs for some reason. Which on one hand is really cool. Like, I'm not saying it's bad that they did it or anything. It's just that if we scroll down a little bit and there's like a couple of benchmarks, they have like, 3D Mark and Battlefield and a couple of other things down here. But like these cards just perform substantially worse on DirectX 12. And the biggest reason probably for that is just because if some of you don't know, so the Fermi cards would be like the GTX 400 and 500 series from Nvidia. These were the first series of DirectX 11 class cards. So DirectX 12 wasn't even like a thing, like at all yet. So as far as like support for this in software and hardware, there was no software support and certainly no hardware support for it. So that's probably why they perform worse. I'm never one to really complain about support for older hardware and seeing updates for it, but I just don't understand really why they did this. So if anybody else out there can maybe shed some light on this, I'm just more confused than anything. But I thought it was worth a mention if you're still using a Fermi card, GTX 4 or 500 series, maybe check out the new drivers and try some games in DX12. They don't have too many games listed here, so your results may vary. But just thought it was interesting, something quick to mention. Speaking of Nvidia, another thing from them. Apparently, Nvidia is working on basically embedding multiple silicon GPU dies into the same substrate. So if you followed the show before, we've talked previously about what AMD's been doing with their EPYC processors, their new server stuff, where basically they have four 8-core Ryzen dies on the same substrate, and then they all talk using interconnects, and that's a whole nother thing. But basically, it's a way for them to scale up their core count while kind of, helping to not make this huge single monolithic die that will produce a lot more heat and all that sort of thing. So apparently Nvidia's been looking into doing this with GPUs, which is really cool. And I'll scroll down a little bit. You can check out the article if you want a lot more details. I'm not going over everything here, but just to give you an idea. So this is the monolithic GPU. This is kind of what we've come to know. This would be something like your Titan, your XX80 Ti class cards, even some of the 80 series cards, all your really, really high-end big GPUs. It's one really big piece of silicon with a lot of cores. They take a lot more power generally. They put a lot more heat, but they're really fast. So what Nvidia is apparently looking into is something more like this here, where you might not have, say, a 1080 Ti or a Titan card, but maybe you have a card with four, say, I'm not going to say 4 1080 dies because that might be a little much, but say 4 1060 kind of level dies on it, which would still be a lot faster than something like a Titan even today. But maybe there's efficiencies to be gained. Maybe you can do get more memory bandwidth out of it because you have multiple GPUs. There's a lot that can be done there. There's a lot of other concerns and other details would have to be worked out. But something like this might be really interesting. It's been done with CPUs, so I don't see any really reason why it couldn't be done with GPUs. But I'm also not an engineer, so just thought it was kind of cool to mention. It could be a really interesting way for us to get some really, really fast GPUs even quicker without having to wait for them. So. Of course, if there's any new developments about that, we'll be talking about it on the show, but that's all we have on that for now. Next up here, Passmark submissions. So if nobody out there is familiar with Passmark is basically a piece of software you can use to just kind of submit specs and submit what you're running in your rig, and then they gather all that data in a big pool, and they make charts such as this one. Some of you may or may not have seen this chart before. This is a chart showing Intel and AMD CPU market share going as far back as Q1 2004. Just going back quite a while. Now, the gist of it is, the short version is, in case any of you have missed it, Intel's kind of been kicking the crap out of AMD for the last, decade. So, yeah. But recently, the last quarter of submissions, AMD's been kind of jumping back. They've been doing a lot better. You can see the change in the chart here. That's been reflected. Now, keeping in mind too, this is not a reflection of necessarily, like, this is not a retailer saying, hey, we have sold this many more AMD CPUs. It's not a direct reflection of market share per se, because this only pertains to the people who submit their stuff to Passmark. So just keep that in mind as well. But it's still interesting data. It's still good to see that AMD's starting to claw some of that back because you guys hear me complain all the time about how Intel CPUs are overpriced, and frankly they still are, but Intel's kind of started to make some changes, and a lot of that is in response to AMD's Ryzen, because AMD finally has an architecture that's actually pretty damn good, and they sell it for a really good price on top of that. So Intel's had to actually make some changes, and it looks like people are actually buying them, which is good to see. So let's hope that continues, and if it gets closer back to 50-50, we might see some real CPU price wars, which I am always down for, because at the end of the day, I mean, who wins? Me and you. So hard to go wrong there. Speaking of Intel, Samsung is, they say, poised to overtake Intel, but what they're really talking about is just in terms of revenue. So Samsung has been killing it, especially when it comes to selling memory. Obviously, Samsung doesn't sell high-powered x86 CPUs like Intel does. They sell CPUs and stuff like that for their phones and whatnot. But where Samsung does a lot is in memory, so SSDs, DRAM, all that kind of stuff. But Samsung has been killing it in terms of just revenue, which is interesting only for the fact that for the last 20-ish years, give or take, Intel's pretty much just been completely unchallenged in this realm. Intel's just been number one. They've been the big bad boy on the block. Nobody's been able to kind of touch them. And I don't know. Part of me's a little surprised. Just because I didn't think Samsung was, I guess, as big as they are, but apparently they're a lot bigger than I guess I gave them credit for, so it's pretty cool. I don't know how that's going to change Intel's perspective in terms of productions and products they make, because right now Intel, they do make very, very high performance and the best, I would say, not consumer, but what's the word I'm looking for? Enterprise class SSDs, stuff like that, stuff you'd see in a data center. Intel's more or less untouched there, but as far as consumer stuff, yeah, they don't really have a whole lot worth buying right now, in my opinion. There is the SSD 600 they released last year, and it's a decent SSD, but the pricing on it, honestly, compared to something like a 960 Evo for the extra couple bucks, if you're already paying a premium for Intel's product, you might as well pay a slightly more premium for Samsung's, and it's way faster. So I would hope that maybe Intel's looking at some of these numbers too, and maybe is looking at releasing some better consumer-oriented SSDs if they want to stay relevant in that segment, because yeah, Samsung's just really, really getting up there. So pretty interesting stuff if you're into, market share and DRAM and all that kind of thing. But speaking of DRAM, more DRAM news. So Micron had an incident at one of their production fabs recently. Basically, the gist of it is there was, I think it was some nitrogen that had leaked out, and nobody was hurt, so that's the main thing. Nobody got hurt, nobody got killed, as far as I know. That's all fine. And as far as I know, at this point, it's pretty much been taken care of. Like, the plant's back up and running and stuff. It, wasn't like a huge disaster, but some nitrogen leaked out, and it killed about 60,000 12-inch dies. Wafers, not dies. Wafers. So that was about roughly 5% of all of Micron's supply of DRAM. So yeah, not the end of the world, but the reason I mentioned this to all you guys is that, RAM prices have been a little pricey over the last kind of year or so, and this isn't going to necessarily send them shooting through the roof, but if you were hoping that RAM was going to get cheaper in the next couple months, I wouldn't hold your breath, because this doesn't help. So just worth mentioning, if you're maybe waiting to buy RAM or something like that, holding off, hoping the prices were going to go down, I don't think they're going to go up through the roof or anything, but they're probably not going to be changing anytime soon, so you might as well just buy. It'll be fine. Moving on. EK water blocks. So some of you folks might know EK for, making like water blocks for CPUs and GPUs, radiators, all that kind of stuff. But they recently announced an M.2 heatsink. So a lot of motherboard manufacturers have been doing this as well, where they put heat sinks on their motherboards to keep M.2 SSDs from overheating. But unfortunately, some of the implementations of those coolers are not really coolers. They actually have been acting as insulators and making M.2 SSDs even hotter and causing them to throttle, which is bad. EK wants to take care of this with a dedicated, nice, thick, heatsink. You can get it in nickel and black, which I think is cool. I think the black one looks pretty badass myself. But, this is from a very reputable company, and I don't have one here to test, obviously. But I do think that it's good to see that somebody's making a really, really good effort to take care of this. Because, during most workloads, your SSD is probably going to be fine, but if you're the type of person that moves a lot of data around, if you really hammer your SSD, then it might be an issue for you, and this might be a great way to mitigate it. And plus, if you're an enthusiast anyway, and you already have some EK stuff in your system, this is just going to add to the look, and it's going to look badass, so I don't know, something pretty cool to check out. They got some pictures of it in the article here if you want to check it out, but I still say the black one looks best. Okay, we're getting near the end here, but I wanted to talk about this because this is really cool. I love anything to do with space, and this one is awesome. So, in case any of you weren't familiar, there was a probe that was launched, I think it was a couple years ago now, 1 or 2 years ago. It was launched a while ago, and it was called JUNO. It was sent out to, I don't want to say explore, but to kind of observe and to gather data on Jupiter, so we can learn more about our gassy friend. And Ars Technica has published a bunch of the photos that got sent back, and man, these photos are beautiful. I won't go through all of them here, but I do want to at least show this one in particular. This one's my favorite. Really, really, really cool picture. This is about just over 50,000 kilometers above Jupiter, taken with some of the instruments on the JUNO probe, and it's just really, really cool. The fact that we can send something out into the universe, into our solar system, and have it send back pictures for me to share with you guys at home. This is really, really cool. This is the kind of stuff that gets me excited, and this is why technology is super awesome. If any of you are interested in space in any sort of way, I really, really, really recommend checking out this article. There's lots of other cool stuff. They talk about Juno's mission and everything else to do with it in there as well, so definitely, definitely worth a read. But I think we're going to be on our last topic for today, which is actually a really fun one. I actually really like this one. We always like to end on some video game stuff, and as much as this isn't directly relating to any one video game, this could be directly related to many video games in the future. So what's going on here is Valve is working on some new controllers. They're calling them Knuckles controller. And what they're doing with this new controller is they're using it to integrate all sorts of different hand gestures and movements and motions and stuff like that into VR, into gaming. So let's say you're playing a shooting game and you need to tell your teammate, hey, go over here and make the gesture, go into that room, the bad guy over there. You can actually do that, and your character will make the gesture as well. You can tell someone to stop. You can go up and shake a character's hand. There are even other hand gestures that you think they probably wouldn't code into there because they might be rude, but all of those hand gestures also apparently work as well, which I think is pretty funny. But another thing that I was thinking about this as well is not so much even player-to-player action. What if you incorporated this into the code of a game to the point where, let's say you're playing like Skyrim or something, just as an example, and you have to go do a quest somewhere and you have to get something from somebody. Well, you can actually go up to them and you can stretch your hand out and actually be handed items and stuff like that in the game. The way you could interact with NPCs could be completely changed, and I think it would add a whole another level of immersion into video games. Like, absolutely. There'd be, infinite ways to communicate with everybody in the world. It'd be a lot of work to implement, but I think this is kind of a cool look of where we're headed. We already have Oculus and Vive, and as much as I don't think this is coming to Oculus or Vive anytime soon, maybe when they do the next refresh, when it's like the Vive 2 or whatever they decide to call it, maybe we'll see something like this incorporated into it. And I think that'd be really, really cool. This is, for me, this is almost one of those things where if they can get some good titles behind this and can really get the gestures down and make them smooth and make them work, that's a system seller for me. Straight up. I would be really, really stoked on that. So I'm hoping that can be done. If you guys want to check out, there is a video in here with a gentleman actually doing some of the motions and going through showing it how it works a little bit. But yeah, I think this would be really, really cool to check out. I would love to see it in some games in the future. And that is going to be about it for this week. That is all of our topics. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked it, feel free to like it. If you want to share it around with your friends, share it around. Feel free to subscribe. Of course, we do this every week. We want to keep bringing it to you. And the video that I talked about previously, the GTX 980 Ti versus GTX 1070 video, is pretty much done. It is going to be coming early next week, so stay tuned for that. We're going to find out which one of those two is the better option, a new 1070 or a used 980 Ti. Which one's better for you? You'll have to stay tuned to find out. But yeah, that's going to do it for me. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next week.